The toxicity at Sandringham. Neil Shawn describes Sandringham as having become toxic. The presence of Prince Andrew has turned the estate into a pariah zone, where other family members are desperate to avoid being photographed or seen with him. The Epstein files and video evidence, rumours of the existence of explosive video footage involving Andrew, are tightening the noose. This puts the palace in a state of catastrophic uncertainty as they wait for the next shoe to drop. Tarnishing Queen Elizabeth II's legacy. Plans to unveil a commemorative statue of the late Queen in April are now being overshadowed. Andrew, once the favourite son, has effectively derailed what should have been a moment of national celebration. William's hard line. Prince William is portrayed as the driving force behind the scenes, determined to draw a definitive line between the Crown and Andrew to safeguard the future of the monarchy. February 2026, Windsor Castle is no longer a symbol of serene tradition. It has become the epicenter of the most ruthless purge in modern history. It began with the ghosts of the past. Right now, at Sandringham, Prince Andrew lives in total isolation as rumours of explosive video footage from the Epstein files begin to leak, threatening to incinerate what remains of his dignity. Andrew is no longer just a disgraced duke. He is a toxic stain, so deep that even the memorials for the late Queen Elizabeth II are being suspended to avoid public backlash. Prince William has seen the writing on the wall, and he understands one thing: to save the future, the unfit must be removed. But Andrew is only the first domino to fall. As the Epstein shadow engulfs the Duke of York, a silent coup is unfolding in London, targeting Queen Camilla herself. An iron curtain has dropped at Clarence House. Under immense pressure from William and Princess Anne, King Charles III has officially locked the door, barring his own queen from the inner circles of future coronation planning. The purge is systematic and total. Camilla's power is being stripped away piece by piece as her grandchildren are scrubbed from official royal portraits, replaced by a singular, unyielding focus on the bloodline of Catherine and her 3 children. From the downfall of Andrew to the erasure of Camilla's lineage, a brutal message is being sent to the world. The new monarchy has no room for scandal, no room for scripted performances, and no room for outsiders. This is no longer a family drama. This is a war for the survival of the throne. When Camilla arrived at Clarence House expecting to discuss William's coronation with the king, the door was quite literally closed in her face. But why? And what does this shocking exclusion reveal about the fractures inside the House of Windsor? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At the heart of this storm is a woman who believed she had finally earned her place, not just beside the king, but within the throne room itself. Camilla had walked a long and treacherous road to reach the title of Queen Consort. Yet on this decisive day, as she arrived at Clarence House ready to help shape the vision of the next king's coronation, she was met not with open arms but with silence, and then a locked door. According to palace insiders, King Charles had, in the hours prior, issued a quiet but firm directive. Camilla was not to attend the meeting. No explanation, no warning, not even the courtesy of a conversation. Senior courtiers were left scrambling. Some questioned the order, others simply obeyed, fearing the wrath of a monarch who had grown increasingly unpredictable. Behind that locked door sat William, his advisers and key royal aides, discussing a coronation that ironically was now at the centre of a cold civil war within the royal family. Camilla, stunned and seething, returned to her private quarters without a word. But inside, she was burning. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. The shock quickly turned to rage. For weeks, Camilla had quietly pushed for a seat at the table, reminding those closest to her that she had stood by Charles through scandal, grief, and betrayal. Now she was being treated as disposable. To her, it was more than a snub. It was a calculated humiliation, one that couldn't have happened without the tacit approval or direct orchestration of someone with real power. Leaks to the press came swiftly. A mysterious tip-off landed in a senior royal correspondent's inbox. Queen Camilla was denied access to the Coronation Council. The media jumped on it, triggering a firestorm of speculation. But while public focus fixated on the drama, those inside the palace knew something far more serious was unraveling behind closed doors. Some believed Charles was trying to protect Camilla from being dragged into a generational tug-of-war. Others insisted he had finally bowed to William's demand for independence. But the most chilling theory, that this was Charles's way of beginning to distance himself from his own queen. Even more puzzling was William's reaction, or rather his complete lack of one. He didn't object, he didn't comment, he didn't lift a finger to include her. Was his silence a sign of loyalty to his father? Or was it William who had orchestrated the exclusion behind the scenes? But this was no isolated incident. Camilla's exclusion was only the first sign of a royal power shift no one saw coming. In hushed voices and veiled language, father and son are waging a cold war, and the battlefield is the crown. As Charles fights to preserve his vision of the monarchy, William is rewriting it behind his back. The coronation is no longer just a ceremony, it's a coup in slow motion. The tension had been simmering for months, but after Camilla's exclusion, it could no longer be ignored. William wasn't just stepping into his future role, he was redrawing the blueprint of monarchy itself. And he was doing it without consulting the king. Inside the palace, murmurs grew louder of secret meeting sessions held late at night, attended by modern advisors, digital strategists, and a select few loyalists. Not a single name approved by Charles. These were not traditionalists, these were disruptors, and William had handpicked each of them. Charles, sensing the growing distance, began to retreat into isolation. His aides noticed the change, paranoia creeping in where confidence once stood. Phone calls ignored, invitations declined. Even trusted friends began to feel unwelcome. The king, surrounded by portraits of past sovereigns, was beginning to feel like one himself, trapped in time, slowly fading from his own reign. And then came the breaking point. Charles received a draft of the initial guest list for William's coronation committee. Missing from it was Camilla's name. It wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. Charles's fury erupted behind closed doors. According to a high-ranking palace aide, the king shouted so loudly it echoed into the gallery. He demanded answers, but William gave none. Instead, William turned to the public. He began cultivating an image of youthful leadership, of modernity. Every appearance was calculated, every word measured. He spoke of inclusion, relevance, and the need for the crown to evolve, and the public responded. In their eyes, William wasn't just the heir, he was already the future king. Charles saw the tide turning, and with it his grip loosening. Whispers of William walking away from the coronation if forced to include outdated elements began circulating in royal circles. Some said he threatened to abdicate before even ascending should his vision be compromised. It was no longer a negotiation, it was a standoff. Behind palace walls, the old and the new monarchy stood face to face, neither blinking. Charles clung to the rituals, the hierarchy, the centuries of royal tradition. William embraced a future where titles meant little and influence lived online. The king watched his son reshape the crown without lifting a sword. It wasn't rebellion in the streets, it was warfare in whispers. And while Charles tried to maintain control, Camilla wasn't about to accept defeat quietly. Camilla doesn't beg, she threatens. What started as wounded pride quickly turned into a full-blown royal ultimatum. Include me or face the consequences. But even Camilla underestimated just how far Charles would go to silence her. The humiliation she endured at Clarence House wasn't something she could brush off. It wasn't a minor oversight, it was a deliberate message. And for a woman who had fought tooth and nail to be recognized not just as a royal companion, but as queen consort, it cut deeper than any tabloid headline ever had. Alone in her private quarters, Camilla was said to be trembling, not from weakness, but rage. She wasn't just being pushed aside, she was being erased. What followed was one of the most explosive private confrontations in recent royal memory. Camilla stormed into Charles's study, her voice sharp and trembling, demanding answers. Her fury, according to a palace aide, was unlike anything they'd ever seen from her. She laid it out clearly. She had earned her place. She had sacrificed her reputation, endured decades of scrutiny, and now he was going to pretend she didn't belong. Charles, stunned, tried to calm the situation, but Camilla would not be silenced. She reminded him of the promises he'd made, the public declarations, the weight of her loyalty. And then came the line that would shake the very foundation of their marriage. If I'm not welcome, I won't stand beside you at all. It wasn't an idle threat. Behind the scenes, Camilla's inner circle was already mobilizing. Old allies from the aristocracy, trusted journalists, PR advisors who had helped build her public redemption arc. They urged her to push back, to make her absence known. Some even floated the idea of Camilla stepping away from public duties entirely, forcing the monarchy to deal with the fallout. But Charles, increasingly embattled, did not flinch. His response was cold, calculated. Then don't. 2 words. That was all it took to turn a marriage into a battlefield. For years, Camilla had been his shield, his comfort, his most loyal companion. But in that moment, Charles didn't speak as a husband, he spoke as a king. The silence that followed was deafening. Staff avoided eye contact, the halls of the palace grew colder. Camilla, once a fixture at every royal engagement, suddenly vanished from the schedule. Rumours of illness circulated, but insiders knew the truth. This was a power play, and both sides were holding their ground. Yet amid this explosive fallout, another figure watched from the shadows, someone who had remained silent through the chaos, biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As tensions reached boiling point inside the palace, a shadowy figure emerged, one who stood to gain from Camilla's fall. They call her the Iron Princess for a reason. Anne may not seek the spotlight, but her influence runs deep. And in Camilla's absence, her presence grew louder. What private conversation tipped Charles into barring his wife? For years, Princess Anne had stood apart from the chaos, stoic and unbothered by the royal melodrama swirling around her. But don't mistake her silence for apathy. Anne has always understood power, not the kind found in headlines or fanfare, but the kind that moves quietly through whispered counsel and strategic silence. And when Camilla was locked out of William's coronation planning, it wasn't lost on anyone that Anne had just met with the king, but the tension between Anne and Camilla was never truly resolved. It stretched back decades, rooted in the fallout of Diana, in loyalty, in grief. Anne had never hidden her distaste for the woman who disrupted the monarchy's most tragic love triangle. She wore it in her eyes, in her clipped tone, in her refusal to play the public game. Camilla, for Anne, had always been a complication, one the firm tolerated, not trusted. But as the monarchy strained under generational pressure, Anne saw an opening. Her vision for the crown was not sentimental, it was surgical. A leaner, harder monarchy, stripped of excess, immune to scandal. In that vision, Camilla was a liability. And William? He agreed. Days before Camilla's exclusion, Anne reportedly had a private audience with Charles. What was said remains sealed behind royal walls, but according to a source close to the matter, Anne was unflinching. She presented not just an opinion, but a strategy. And one phrase allegedly lingered in the king's mind long after she left: she weakens the crown. That wasn't advice, it was a directive. In the days that followed, subtle shifts emerged. Advisers loyal to Camilla were sidelined. Event plans were revised. And most notably, Anne's name began appearing more frequently in internal briefings. It became clear someone was quietly pulling strings. Camilla, sensing the change, lashed out behind the scenes. In a moment of raw frustration, she's said to have referred to Anne as a snake in pearls. But there was nothing venomous about Anne's moves. They were deliberate, calculated, ruthless. She didn't need to shout, she didn't need to demand. All she needed was one moment of truth whispered in Charles's ear, and the Queen Consort was out. But while Anne played the long game, the public began to ask the question the palace couldn't silence. When headlines blared, Queen Camilla missing, speculation erupted like wildfire. From royal illness to silent divorce rumours, the palace was forced to scramble. But was this media chaos accidental or engineered? Within days of her exclusion, Camilla's absence was no longer just a palace secret, it was a national spectacle. Tabloids ran double-page spreads asking where the Queen Consort had gone. She had missed 3 public appearances, her name vanished from official schedules, and, with no statement from the firm, conspiracy filled the vacuum. Had she fled the palace in protest? Was her marriage in crisis? Or worse, was Charles preparing for an unthinkable silent divorce? The online space became a frenzy. Social media feeds flooded with theories. One post claimed she had been quietly flown to Scotland. Another insisted she had been stripped of security, a humiliating signal of royal demotion. Well, where is Queen Camilla trended for 2 days straight. In this silence, every absence screamed louder than words. But the most damning part wasn't the public speculation, it was the palace's calculated restraint. Reporters reached out demanding clarity. The official line was cold and robotic. No comment. But insiders confessed it was far from routine. A senior royal source admitted that even the communications team had been kept in the dark. We were told to say nothing, just let it die down. But it didn't. It grew, And then came the moment that turned whispers into shockwaves. Camilla re-emerged, but only briefly, at a private charity luncheon. She appeared pale, subdued, almost unrecognizable in her silence. Cameras captured her strange smile, her rigid posture, the way she avoided questions. It was enough to confirm everyone's worst fears. Something had gone terribly wrong. Within palace walls, the war between PR teams had reached boiling point. William's camp pushed for focus on the future, on his coronation, his modern image. Camilla's team, sidelined and furious, demanded visibility, recognition, and truth. The tension spilled into press leaks, subtle jabs and statements, and dueling narratives whispered into the ears of journalists. But the most explosive commentary came not from the palace, but from Camilla's own circle. One of her longest-standing confidantes spoke anonymously to a senior royal editor. The quote, "She's been cut out completely." It wasn't denial, it was confirmation. Camilla was no longer just absent, she was being erased. And in that erasure, the monarchy revealed its fault lines. Behind the glitz and control, the House of Windsor was cracking under pressure. Power was shifting, alliances were changing, and Camilla, once thought untouchable, was now a ghost in her own kingdom. Yet, while the press focused on Camilla's disappearance, a new revelation would shift the scandal centre entirely. Forget tradition, this was William's coronation, and he made sure of it. Behind closed doors, he drafted a guest list that shocked even the most seasoned courtiers, missing Camilla's closest allies and Charles's oldest friends. It began quietly, a string of meetings held not in Buckingham's grand halls, but in discreet corners of Kensington. The guest list for William's Coronation Planning Committee had become the centre of a revolution masked as reform. And at the heart of it sat a new breed of strategist, young, media-savvy, ruthless Gen Z advisors who knew how to manipulate algorithms, not etiquette. Their task wasn't to honour legacy, it was to craft an image. And the image William wanted was clear, a monarchy that looked forward, not back. One that reflected modern Britain, not feudal nostalgia. That meant cutting the fat. And to him, that included every face tied to scandal, excess, or irrelevance. Camilla's inner circle, aristocrats, traditionalists, the same figures who once helped buffer Charles's reign, were systematically scrubbed from the guest list. The Lord Chamberlain, a stoic gatekeeper of protocol, was said to be livid. In a moment of rare candour, he was overheard muttering, "Half the list is gone." That wasn't a mistake, it was a purge. And it didn't stop with Camilla's allies. Some of Charles's longest-serving companions, figures who'd been beside him since his investiture as Prince of Wales, were quietly crossed off. No explanations, just silence. In their place, a radically different guest list, climate activists, Olympic medalists, mental health advocates, and social media influencers. Some had barely met the royal family, others had criticised them in the past. But they fit William's vision. Young, diverse, forward-facing. To the old guard, it felt like treason. But to William, it was strategy. When Charles finally saw the revised list, sources claim he was speechless. For a moment, he stared at it as if reading a foreign language. Names he'd grown up with, gone. Titles he revered, erased. He reportedly asked, "Where is Lord Farnham? Where is Bishop Carter?" The response, "They didn't make the final cut." The final cut? A phrase that echoed like a blade slicing through centuries of monarchy. It wasn't just a guest list, it was a declaration of power. William was no longer waiting for the throne. He was shaping it on his terms, without permission, without apology. Camilla, watching from the shadows, understood the deeper meaning. Her world wasn't shrinking, it was being dismantled brick by brick, name by name. And while Charles tried to reclaim control, the past came knocking with a voice he hadn't heard in years. He wasn't supposed to be involved. He wasn't even supposed to care. But a midnight call between two estranged brothers turned the tide of the coronation and left Camilla reeling. The call came without warning. William had been drowning in pressure, torn between public expectation, palace politics, and the mounting chaos Camilla's exclusion had unleashed. And then, in the middle of the night, his phone rang. On the other end, Harry. The brother who had turned his back on the monarchy, the spare who had once vowed never to return. And yet he did return, if only for one moment that would change everything. What began as silence quickly turned into vulnerability. Harry didn't call to argue, he called to warn. The coronation, he said, had become a circus. The focus had shifted from legacy to infighting, but then came the words that cut the deepest. Mom would never want her there. That sentence didn't explode. It landed like grief, slow, aching, undeniable, and it shattered something in William. According to a close aide, he wept. Not out of guilt, but out of recognition. Recognition of how far the family had fallen. The next morning, William was different, quieter, more reflective. His tone with staff changed, and though no one knew why, the pressure around Camilla's potential role in the coronation began to build again, this time from within. It wasn't just external backlash, it was personal. Now the memory of Diana had returned, and with it, an unspoken reckoning from across the Atlantic. A storm was brewing. The Sussex camp remained characteristically silent, but someone close to the couple leaked just enough to set fire to the royal press cycle. The message: Charles had been desperate to get Harry to attend the coronation. That he had offered concessions, even apologies. But Harry had one condition, and it was non-negotiable. Camilla could not be honoured at the coronation. Not formally, not symbolically, not at all. Meghan, meanwhile, had allegedly told Harry to stay out of it. "Let them destroy each other," she reportedly said. But Harry couldn't. Not this time. Because no matter the distance, no matter the damage, this coronation was still his mother's shadowed legacy, and Camilla's presence to him felt like an insult carved in stone. The palace now faced an impossible choice: appease the future king's brother, or risk losing both sons to silence once again. The queen consort had been left out before, but this time she knew it was no longer just politics. It was personal. And just when it seemed Camilla had lost everything, she discovered one final card to play. Hidden away in a velvet box, Camilla's private diary contained decades of secrets, including ones that could unravel the royal image entirely. When an insider hinted she was ready to leak, the palace plunged into panic. This wasn't a tabloid stunt. It wasn't some salacious revenge fantasy. It was raw, real, and written in Camilla's own hand. A diary she had started decades ago, first as a woman in the shadows, then as the king's companion, and finally as queen consort. The entries were never meant to be read. But in her darkest moment, when she felt the monarchy slipping from her grasp, Camilla reached for the only weapon that could make the whole palace tremble: her truth. The entries were deeply personal, but devastatingly pointed. There were pages detailing Charles's darkest insecurities, his doubts over his reign, his rages behind closed doors, and his loneliness even as the crown rested on his head. She had written about their fights, his resentment over William's rising popularity, his fragile ego when Diana's name surfaced in public adoration. It wasn't just emotional, it was damaging. But the pages that caused true alarm were the ones about William and Anne. Camilla had recorded every tension, every betrayal, every cold glance. She chronicled the moment she realized Anne would never accept her, the moment she caught William whispering to his aides about future leadership without her. And then the most haunting entry of all. He will never love the crown more than her ghost. There was no need to name her. Everyone knew it meant Diana. When word leaked that Camilla was considering letting the diary go public, the palace went into lockdown. Aides scrambled, senior advisors held emergency meetings. There were frantic calls to lawyers. The thought of Camilla's raw, unfiltered words hitting the press wasn't just inconvenient, it was nuclear. Charles, reportedly shaken, met with Camilla privately. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He pleaded, not as a monarch, but as a man who once promised her peace in exchange for a lifetime of loyalty. But Camilla, hardened and exhausted, said nothing. Just silence, the kind of silence that says, "You pushed too far." Rumours quickly began to swirl that copies of the diary had already been shared. One source claimed a well-known royal biographer had the material in their possession. Another suggested encrypted scans had been sent overseas to ensure they could never be fully buried. Whether bluff or reality, no one could confirm. And that uncertainty was exactly what made it so powerful. This wasn't just about reclaiming her voice, it was about leverage, about reminding the palace, reminding Charles that she wasn't a figurehead to be erased. She was a survivor, a witness, and now potentially the most dangerous voice in the monarchy. But as the storm raged, Charles made a move that no one, especially Camilla, could have seen coming. In a single calculated announcement, King Charles shattered all illusions. Standing before the cameras, he endorsed William's coronation vision and confirmed Camilla would play no official role. The Queen Consort was now Queen in name only. The press release was brief, but its impact was seismic. After months of silence, speculation, and scandal, the palace finally spoke. Charles called William's vision a necessary evolution of the monarchy, framing it as a generational shift, a symbolic handover of legacy. But buried beneath the diplomatic phrasing was the real headline: the omission. Camilla's name, once fixed beside his in every royal decree, was gone, not thanked, not mentioned, not even alluded to. For insiders, it was confirmation of what they had feared and what Camilla had refused to believe. The king had made his choice, not just for the crown, but for history. There was no ceremony, no formal goodbye. Only a photograph quietly captured of Camilla leaving Clarence House. No staff, no aides, just her, a suitcase, and silence. According to a palace source, she hadn't spoken to Charles in 3 days. And when she did, it was brief, final, without drama. "I understand," she allegedly said. But no one believed it ended there. Behind closed doors, some called it the quietest abdication in history. A queen erased, without a word, without a crown falling, without a throne shaken. Yet for those who truly understood the palace's brutal calculus, it wasn't surprising. Camilla had been useful until she wasn't. And now, in the age of optics and image, she had become the cost of modernization, Public reaction was swift and brutally divided. Some celebrated the return of a lean, future-facing monarchy free from the shadows of past scandals. Others mourned what felt like an execution in slow motion, a woman who had clawed her way from mistress to monarch only to be discarded when inconvenient. Social media lit up with tributes, with scorn, with disbelief. And Charles? He remained composed, dignified but hollow. His public endorsement of William was praised as strategic, but privately many wondered if it was also an act of surrender. Had he finally accepted that the future didn't include him? Or had he been forced to choose between a crown and a companion? For William, the moment marked an unspoken coronation of his own. He had outmaneuvered the Queen Consort, reshaped the monarchy, and gained his father's blessing, all without officially wearing the crown. It wasn't just a win, it was a takeover wrapped in deference. And for Camilla, it was the end of a war waged in silence, a war she never thought she'd lose. But in the end, legacy wasn't enough. Loyalty wasn't enough. Not when tradition bent to optics and truth bowed to perception. As the curtain falls on this royal war, one question remains. In a monarchy ruled by tradition, who really holds the power to break it? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.